Good evening, gentlemen. Kidarkenu Bakodesh. I'd like to start with a beracha. I'd like to is Borei Olam. We're about to say Shakol Nihya Bidvaro. Everything comes about through Hashem's word. When you get up to give words, you also have to remember that everything comes through Hashem's words. And when He wants to give those words, they come. And when He doesn't want to give those words, they don't. It's like a light switch. He can turn it on, He can turn it off. Like everything in life. So let's remind ourselves together on this blessing. Who's in control? Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech haolam, shakol nihya bidvaro. I'd like to remind everybody that Tuesday nights is the night of the shmooze. Thursday nights we give a shiur. Tuesday night we give a shmooze. And I think tonight's shmooze is extremely important, especially for our generation today. Tonight's shmooze is all about what it means to have a Rebbe. Tonight's shmooze is going to try to inspire us enough to realize how letting go of control and reaching out and asking a Rebbe, a mentor, for advice, for hadracha, for hashkafa, for direction in all areas and aspects of life is not only something that's based on the entire chain of Torah from Moshe to Yoshua to the Zkenim, right down to our generation. And you're continuing another link in that incredible chain of tradition of Kesher, Rebbe, Talmud, all the way down to this generation. But you're also going to find that the minute you find yourself a real Rebbe, and you turn to him, your life gets easier. A lot of anxiety is taken out of the day-to-day grind of life. You have somebody to turn to. You have someone to rely on. You have someone to say, Rebbe, I need advice. I need direction. I have this lump in my chest. I have this weight on my shoulders. I don't know if I'm doing right. And although you should know, the older you get, the harder this is to start. It's much easier to start this understanding of making yourself, va'aseh lecha rav, make yourself a Rebbe. The younger you are, the easier it is. And then it's easier to keep it as you get older. But to start this older is not as simple. Because when a person is older, he's already set in his ways. At that point, there's a certain human reaction. We don't like to be told what to do by nobody. Ask my wife. And because of that, the older we get, the tougher it is to really master this. But little did we know that there's a certain ease and relief when we walk out of a Rebbe's house with the answers and direction of all the worries, troubles, and questions we walked in with. Please remember this. To have a Rebbe is literally to have a gift from Borei Olam, going through the bumps and difficulties of life. So bear with me on this. You're going to see where tonight's shmooze is going. I'm asking Borei Olam to give me the words, because this could be a little bit of a delicate topic. But at the same time, it's more needed today than ever. Because boy, we're living in darkness. And boy, nothing makes sense. And boy, there's a lack of direction and purpose in the lives of Klal Yisrael today, especially amongst the young. Without a Rebbe, where are you going? Without a Rebbe, where's your confidence? Who's building you up? Who finds the good in you and reminds you on the bad days that you have a great future? Where do you get that if not for a real Rebbe? And when I say a real Rebbe, I mean a real Rebbe. A real Rebbe is someone who loves you in spite of your lackings. A real Rebbe is someone who knows everything about you and still loves you. Stands by your side. Reminds you of your mission. And every time you slip off the path, he brings you back on. This is a real Rebbe. Many people have this wrong today. Many people think, especially you'll come across certain people in the chinuch business, they think that their expertise in chinuch is to be able to weed out the bad from the good and find the good boys from the bad boys. And the boys that don't size up to their cookie cutter understanding of what they think is a good boy gets tossed out right away, and the rest of them are lucky enough and privileged to stay in their school. I don't know if you read it, but someone was sending out around something this week that was a very brief quip, a brief excerpt of a famous story that took place with Reb Steinemann, Zechet Tzadik Lebracha. Maybe one day I'll tell you the whole story. For now, I'm just going to tell you the quip because I don't want to delay the big pointer tonight. But a principal came to Reb Steinemann, and I'm thinking in my mind now that this principal could have been quite a few principals that I actually know today. They could have done the same story. But this is what happened. A principal came to the great Gadol, Reb Steinemann, and he said to him, "Is it a problem throwing a boy out of yeshiva on Shabbat? Because it might be a shaila of borer." He's separating the psolet from the ochel. In English, by throwing out the boy, he's separating the bad from the good on Shabbat. And that's a milacha deoraita of borer. So is that a problem, Rabbi? Reb Steinemann looked at this principle and said to him the following: if in your eyes you can look at any boy in Klal Yisrael and see psolet, then you got to find yourself another line of work. There's quite a few principles I'd like to tell this to. Do you know what a Rebbe is? A Rebbe is a father in an angelic form. Your father brought you into this world. Your Rebbe will bring you into the next world. Your father is a father of Olam Hazeh. Your Rebbe is your father in Olam Haba. Don't ever forget what I just told you. What type of Rebbe would harp and look to catch and trap a student on their shortcomings and lackings if he was meant to be the one with the mission to bring this boy to the next world as his father in Olam Haba? Would you ever think of anything more counterproductive than that? Could there be anything more counterproductive than that? So sometimes we need to remind ourselves of what the job entails in being a real Rebbe, and being a real principal, and being a real madrich, and being a real mechanech, mechanechet. Remember what the Torah imbued in your job, and not what you think is professionalism. Remember and don't forget. Let's talk tonight about what's a Rebbe and how important the Rebbe is and how important the mission that Klal Yisrael carries as individuals and the role that the Rebbe plays in that mission. Are you ready for this? It's a big one. Hashem, give me the words to say it in a way that I don't offend anyone. I'm not that type of person. I like to build up people. I love people. Not looking chas v'shalom to offend anyone. Lehefech. I would love for young guys to hear this now, so that when they start growing the gray whiskers, they'll be able to give it to their Talmidim the way we got it from our Rebbes. Last week's parasha. Moshe Rabbeinu. Rabban Shel Yisrael. There's a Rebbe. A Rebbe that was offered the whole kit and caboodle. And he said, thank you, but no thank you. I am not going to be disloyal. I'm not going to give up on Klal Yisrael in their time and moment of need. This is a Rebbe. Hashem says, Moshe Rabbeinu, leave me. I'll wipe them out after the sin of the Egel, and I'll start over with you. What does Moshe Rabbeinu say? Borei olam, mecheni na misifrecha. Not only aren't I taking the deal, but if they're going down, I'm going down with the ship. If they're going to be wiped out, you might as well wipe me out as well. Wipe out my name, erase my name from your Torah. Look at what a Rebbe is. Look at the love, the unconditional love that a Baal Mechanech, that a real Baal Mechanech has. He's not thinking about his own pride. He's not thinking about his own brand. He's not thinking about his own school. He's not thinking about his own name. He's not thinking about what the street is going to say about him or what his ulterior motive, intentions, gains are. He's thinking only about you and what's good for his Talmud and what's good out of love for the person at stake. And he makes selfless decisions. And he gives his heart and he gives his soul and he cries for them. Let's go back to Reb Steinman one more time. Two Menahalim from Bnei Brak come to Reb Steinman. And they say to Reb Steinman, there's a boy that is trouble. He did this and he did that. They start giving a whole laundry list of all the terrible things that the kid did. They said, that's it. Adkan. We had enough of this kid. We have such trouble. We're holding by throwing him out. They're coming to Reb Steinman for an eitzah. Reb Steinman looks at these two Menalim and he asks them, what's the boy's name and what's his mother's name? They look at Reb Steinman and they say, we know what the boy's name is. We don't know what the mother's name is. Reb Steinman looks at him. He looks at him like, you mean you weren't davening for him? You came here today to ask me if you should throw him out? But all along this time, you weren't davening for your Talmud? He looked at him like oy vey. We have a Rebbe, Rabban Shel Yisrael, Moshe Rabbeinu, who the Gemara in the 5th Perek in Berachot tells us that there were 3 people that spoke with a degree of chutzpah to Borei Olam. Don't try this at home. 3 people. And Hashem let them get away with it. Matter of fact, I don't want to say this the wrong way, but actually Borei Olam was impressed of their vigor, that they're ready to go to that extent for the cause, for the Jewish people. The first one, says the Gemara, Chana. She said strong words to Hashem, trying to convince Borei Olam to finally allow her to conceive after so many years of being barrenless, so many years of not having children. And she told Borei Olam strong words. Strong words. If you don't send me a child that I can bring up as a gadol, not just any child, Gavra de Guvrin. I want a man of men. I want a big child, a great man. Little did she know who she was describing. She was describing the future Navi of Klal Yisrael, the great Shemuel HaNavi, Gavra de Guvrin. El Hanar Hazeh Hitpalalti. Wow, what he became. He became Shakul Kemoshe ve'Aharon. Wow. But at the time she was saying, Borei Olam, you have to give me a child. If you don't give me a child, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go and I'm going to hide away for a minute or two with a foreign man so that my husband will suspect me, take me, and bring me down to the Bet HaMikdash, calling me and accusing me of a sotah, in order to make me drink from the Mayim HaMe'ararim. Because we all know that a woman who drinks from the Mayim HaMe'ararim when accused of adultery and she was truly innocent, if she had no children up until that point, Hashem will give her then the blessing to have children. So says Chana, Hashem, I don't want to go there, but should we go there? Please give me a child without having to go there, putting myself in a position of suspicion. First person that spoke strong to Hashem. Hashem answered her tefillot through vigor. Second person that spoke very strongly to Hashem, Eliyahu HaNavi. Klal Yisrael was doing all types of sin. Eliyahu HaNavi tells Hashem, it's not their fault. You were the one that put this terrible Yetzer Hara inside of them. You were the one that put this evil inclination, which is so difficult to deal with, which every generation comes back at us with a different trick, with a different name, with a different angle. How do you expect Basar Vedam to go up against a fiery demon like this Yetzer Hara? It's not their fault. They're sinning because you put in them this Yetzer Hara. It was a certain intonation there that Hashem has part of the guilt of the Jewish people's sins. Wow, that's not something you're going to say. The Gemara says Hashem said, Eliyahu, you're right. Hashem was maskim to him. Although he spoke out of line, Hashem was maskim to him. And who was the third one, guys? Who was the third one? Moshe Rabbeinu. Last week's parasha, Jewish people fall into the terrible sin of the golden calf, the egel, which if you were here Thursday night, you found out that it was only a calf on the front half, but it was a donkey on the back half. I'm hoping you heard that class because that was heavy. That was heavy. I'm happy you brought your notebooks because you really had to keep the head on that one. That was a heavy one. But nonetheless, they fall into this terrible sin of the golden calf. Moshe Rabbeinu steps up and he says to Borei Olam, V'di zahav, yoter midai zahav. You see the gold of the golden calf? Who gave them that gold? You did. You gave them too much money. Moshe Rabbeinu told this to God. You, V'di zahav is the pasuk in Dvarim, but it's a play on words, says the Gemara. Yoter midai zahav. You gave him too much gold. Now look what they did with it. They ended up turning around and using it against you. They used it for a golden calf. Wow. Could you imagine the brazenness to say that to Hashem? But he's coming now as the great Magen Yisrael. The great Magen Yisrael. The Rebbe that's ready to fight for his Talmud no matter what. And he's not going to take no for an answer. Says the Gemara, Moshe Rabbeinu kivyachol. I don't know how we can, but kivyachol, he grabbed onto the glima of Kudsha B'richu. That means he grabbed onto Borei Olam's robe or jacket or clothing, kivyachol, as if God has clothing. Whatever that word, whatever that means. The talus, well, I mean, whatever it was. But he grabbed onto it. He said, I'm not letting go. I'm not letting go until you forgive my Talmidim, until you forgive Klal Yisrael, my sheep, spoken as the true shepherd. That's right. That's why he was picked in the first place. Don't you remember back when, in the day of Midian, when Moshe Rabbeinu was watching the sheep of his father-in-law, Yitro, and one baby Shepsela takes off, runs and runs. How far? 3 days worth of distance. Can you imagine? 3 days. So what do you say? Okay, listen, one bit the dust. Okay, come on. I still have a great batting average. I lost one. I have 299 left. Could you cut me some slack? What do you want me to do? Leave the bunk and run after one crazy kid? What do you want me to do? I have everybody else to worry about. You know how many times we hear this? Not Moshe Rabbeinu. He ran after the one crazy kid for 3 days. And he caught up with him. And not only did he catch up with him, the Midrash says that he saw that the little baby sheep was so tired after running for 3 days. He raises it up, puts it on his shoulders, and starts to carry it on his shoulders back to the flock. That's a Rebbe. Ay, Borei Olam. We need more of those Rebbes. This generation today. While the sheep run in all directions, we need Rebbes with good running shoes who still has the heart to say, you know what? It's not enough on a 30-kid class to be reaching 10, leaving the other 20 to vegetate. Because, hey, what am I supposed to do? At least I'm reaching 10. Moshe Rabbeinu went and chased everyone, found what makes them tick, found what makes them passionate, and reached them where they are, and reached them, and then raised them, and then put them on his shoulders. Make no mistake, that was the moment that Hashem appeared to Moshe Rabbeinu in the burning bush for the first time. Because if you're ready to do that for sheep, you're hired. Could you do that for my kids? Because that's who I want as a Rebbe for my children in Klal Yisrael. You're hired. And therefore there was no surprise to Borei Olam that Moshe Rabbeinu came off this aggressive. V'di zahav. You gave them too much gold. They left Egypt with a ton of gold. Kriyat Yam Suf, they ended up grabbing all the rest of the treasures of the world. You gave them so much gold that, look, they ended up using it against you. And not only that, I am not letting go, Borei Olam, until you forgive them. Moshe Rabbeinu, let me wipe them out, says Borei Olam. I'll start over with you. Says Moshe Rabbeinu, no dice. Not only that, if they're going down, mecheni na misifrecha, wipe my name out of your books as well. I'm going down with them. That's a Rebbe. That's a Rebbe. That's a principle. That's a mechanech. That's a bal chinuch. Those are the people that make Borei Olam proud. They're not thinking about themselves, their brand, their name, their product, their school. They're thinking about the kid that they accepted the responsibility for. You took this kid into your school. You took him into your school. You took responsibility on this child. Step up to that responsibility. Be real. And if he's not exactly the way you expected him to be when you first accepted him, guess what? He's a kid. Could you imagine if people would adopt this idea to marriage? That's frightening. I married the girl. I thought she was like this. Turns out, after living with her, I found out she wasn't exactly the way I... So what do? You divorce her? That's the answer. You throw her out. Throw it out. Find a new yeshiva. Doesn't fit here. Better line. We're not equipped to deal with a Talmud like that. Let her find a place that's more equipped. I lose sleep on this. I'm Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu was ready to go down with the ship. And we are not ready to go down for one kid. Chad Gadya, Chad Gadya. One kid, one kid. As a Ben Shushan, I always thought to myself, maybe that's why the Haggadah ends with Chad Gadya. Because it's the night of Pesach, the night of Geula. And Hashem is reminding us. But what about the one kid? The one kid. Don't make me cry, please. Chad Gadya, Chad Gadya. What about that one kid, that one kid? Why'd you throw him out? One kid. Could have made the difference in Klal Yisrael. Who knows what that kid could have been? Comes Moshe Rabbeinu and reminds us what a Rebbe is. Fantastic. And that's the preview of tonight's big Yesod. Tonight's the shmooze, right guys? Tonight's the shmooze. Thursday night's the share. I know I keep saying this. There's a reason why I'm saying this. Because somebody once told me, he says, I can't believe it. Tuesday night, he's one guy. Thursday night, he's somebody else. No, I'm not schizophrenic. We're doing two different things. Tuesday night, we're doing a shmooze. Thursday night, we're doing a share. I hope people understand that there's a difference between a shmooze and a share. Today, some people have mixed up the difference between a shmooze and a share. But that doesn't reflect on what we're trying to do. We're trying to do it for real. So now that you know what a Rebbe is, and now you knew who Rabban Shel Yisrael was, Moshe Rabbeinu, and how he fought for us unconditionally, and how he was ready to literally die for us, now you're going to find out what I want to tell you tonight about the moment that the Rebbe was not here. Now listen to this. The Gemara over there tells us something amazing. The minute that the Jewish people made the egel, the golden calf, the pasuk says, Moshe Rabbeinu was told by God in Shamayim, Lech red ki shichet amecha. Go down. Your people have done a destructive act of sin. Wow. Strong words. Says the Gemara, Lech red. Says the Gemara, Lech red migdulatecha. Moshe Rabbeinu, you're going to go down from your gadlut, your high madrega, your greatness. Because the only reason why I gave you greatness was for the sake of leading a great people. But now that the people fell from their greatness, you fall with them. Now we're going to take a 10-second time out and use this for station identification to bring you a message from the understanding of true leadership. What does true leadership mean? A true leader is someone who understands that all his fame, his strength, and his siyata d'shmaya is given to him only because of the people he leads. I just gave you a secret, guys. You want to become someone great, you want to go up in incredible talent and strength, kochot, siyata dishmaya, hatzlacha, mazal, find people to lead. Hashem will give you packages of blessing, strength, and siyata dishmaya that you yourself could never have gotten just alone as an individual. But now He'll give it to you for the sake of the people you're leading. In the zechut of the tzibur, He'll give you greatness, much greater than anything you could have aspired to as an individual, a yachid. Lech red migdulatecha. Hashem says to Moshe Rabbeinu, you're only as good as the people you're leading. I gave you gadlut and greatness because I wanted you to lead a great people. But now that the people sinned, and now that the people went down from their gadlut, now that the people fell, you go down with them. Because the gadlut is only for the sake of the people. Wow, there's a lesson in leadership. But now I want to tell you something that I think is off the charts. I heard this from Rabbi Gladstein, and I want to share it with you. It's a beautiful vart. From the Baal HaTumim. Listen to this. If you take a look in Sefer Torah, you'll see that there are, two letters that are written much larger than the typical letters written in Sefer Torah. They have a much larger font than the typical letters written in Sefer Torah. Now, coming from Purim, this is exciting because we had a whole class on the large letters and the small letters. But now I'm talking about the Sefer Torah itself. There are two letters that are written very big, much bigger than the typical letter. Which are they? So, we know that in the Pasuk Vet Hanan, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, the Daled in Echad, in the Sefer Torah, is written much larger than all the rest of the letters. Big Daled. Okay. What else do you got for me, Rabbi? There's another letter that's written in Torah very large. Lo tishtahave le'el acher. Do not bow down to any other gods. Yes? The resh in the word acher is very large. So let's take a look at this. Hashem echad, the dalet is large. El acher, the resh is large. Why? Says Borei Olam, when you write a Sefer Torah, make sure that these letters are never interchangeable. Hashem echad, and not Hashem acher. El acher, and God forbid not El echad. Don't you ever switch these, because the word acher and the word echad are the exact same letters down to the last letter. If it's a dalid, it's echad, Hashem echad. If it's a resh, it's acher, El acher, a different God. Says Hashem, Moshe Rabbeinu, Lech red migdulatecha. Lech red. Red is resh dalid. These are the two letters that were written large in the Torah. Lech red. Go down from the enlargement of the two letters resh and dalid, because the reason why we made these letters large in the Torah is that you don't mix up Hashem echad with El acher, and they mixed it up. And therefore, the whole point of making them gdulatecha and enlarging the resh and the dalid was to remember who is the only God and who is not God. And they just made an avodah zarah, and they just mixed it up. And therefore, the gdulatecha of the resh and the dalid, lech. There was no point in enlarging these two letters in the Torah because they mixed it up anyways. Look, they don't remember anymore who's Hashem Echad, and they don't remember more who's El Acher. Lech red, the Resh and the Dalid were mixed up. No point to be Gdulatecha. No point to be enlarged. They missed the message. Wow. Wow. Pshatim like that come once in a while, but not every day. That's $1 billion pshat. But now I want to expound on the brilliance of this Baal HaTumim. And I want to tell you, what's the difference between the letter Dalet and the letter Resh? Not much. Not much. Their forms are very, very similar. Just the Dalet has one little knetch on the top that makes the difference between him being a Dalet and not a Resh. Sometimes it could be one little knetch of a difference to be the difference between Hashem Echad and Kel Acher. There could be one knetch of a difference between a Ma'amin in Hashem and an Apikoros. Do you hear what I'm telling you? Such a fine line between the Dalet and the Resh. Between reading the word Echad and reading the word Acher. A tiny difference. It's a little mashu on the top of the letter. A little chupchik. A little zach. But that tiny little something could be the difference between a mamin and a apikoros. That little difference defines the Dalet as Echad and takes away from the krumness of the Resh. The Resh is a little bit more crooked than the Dalet. That little difference between them is the difference between someone who's a mamid and someone who is krum. Wow. When did this happen? When did the Jewish people mix up the Dalet and the Resh? Lech red migdulatecha. Take out the enlargements of the Resh and the Dalet because they were supposed to be there to remind you the difference, and they mixed it up. When did this happen? It happened when the Rebbe wasn't around. Because if Moshe Rabbeinu would have been there, this would never have happened. Now you see the weight that a Rebbe plays in the life of a Jew. When the Rebbe's not around, mamash, people can go from Echad to Acher. When the Rebbe's not around, they can go from the Dalet to the Resh. They can go from a Ma'amin B'Hashem Irat Shamayim. Remember, Hashem Echad is Kabbalat Ol Malchut Shamayim. Don't ever forget that. Hashem Echad. He can go from the Dalet, which is Kabbalat Ol Malchut Shamayim, to the krumkeit of the Resh, which is a little bit more twisted, a little bit more crooked, to Kel Acher, El Acher. That's what happens when the Rebbe's not around. That's what happens when you don't have a Rebbe around. That's what happens when people are free thinking on their own and they could decide which way they feel the Torah should go. You need a Rebbe. We need guidance. We live in such times of darkness. We can't even see 2 inches in front of our own nose. The whole world is upside down. The whole world is topsy-turvy. When we think this is going to happen, the opposite happens. We think this guy's president, the other guy's president. We think COVID is ending, a new strand comes along. I mean, how many surprises did we have just in the last 12 months? Tell me that you don't need a Rebbe. Tell me you don't need a guide, a Baal Madrich, Hadracha, Hashkafa. Who is your Rebbe? Because you should know that he to you is Moshe Rabbeinu to the Jewish people. He's your Moshe Rabbeinu. And it doesn't matter if he is 25 or if he's 105. Shamayim gives those Rebbes an incredible siyata d'shmaya to guide the people for the sake of the people. Hashem is so impressed when a guy can get over his own ego and he can get over his own stolz and he could actually be machnia himself and walk up to a Rebbe and say, I need help. It's not easy when people get older to actually say, I need help. But you know how big that person is? When they can overcome the challenge and the gaiva and say to themselves, I need hadracha, I need help, I need a Rebbe. People think, Rebbe, that was for the days when I was in yeshiva, 9th grade, 10th grade, high school, all right, bet midrash, I heard shir, I went to Israel, Rabbi Asher Arlieli, Rabbi Elephant, the Mir Yeshiva, Reb Gustman. But today, I could think for myself. I'm a big guy. Of course you can think for yourself. If you couldn't think for yourself, you wouldn't know that there was a problem in the first place. Your abilities of intellect is to understand when things are not so right. And you need clarity to kind of brush it off someone. Someone that has godly, divine revelation that could guide you in the proper way. That's your Rebbe. Amazing. Because sometimes you can have the biggest ma'amin, biggest yirat shamayim, mamish, a guy that's kabbalat ol malchut shamayim every day of his life. And on a certain issue, he's off by a drop. And he can go from kabbalat ol malchut shamayim to el acher in such a krumkeit on one bad decision if he would have only have spoken to his rabbi. Who's your rabbi? Do you know if you would bring a rabbi into your life of shalom bayit between you and your wife, do you know how much more effective and liberating your shalom bayit would be? Because when you have someone there who's non-biased and is willing to guide for the sake of shalom and emet, then the conversations between husband and wife do not have to escalate. It doesn't have to get to any name calling. It doesn't have to get to, sometimes, God forbid, the places that they get to, because that's the point of frustration when they feel that there's no one left to turn to. But if they knew they had someone to turn to, there would be no reason to go there. Say, okay, honey, we disagree. It's pretty clear. I see you're not bending, I'm not bending. This isn't an area that we're getting to first base on together. Let's go to the rabbi. There's no reason for anger at that. I mean, what are you getting angry about? What are you getting angry about? If you know in your head that this is a direction that you can take in a moment of dispute at home, what are you getting angry about? What are you name calling? Why are you bringing in her parents? What do your in-laws got to do with it? They have everything to do with it. No. What do your in-laws have to do? What's the point of that? That only comes out of frustration. But if you know there's someone to turn to, that's going to be fair and biased, a bal eitzah, there's no reason to get there. There's no reason to get there. What about my kids, Rabbi? What do I do with my kids? I'm having a trouble with this kid and that kid. Lo aleinu, we should never know from this. And then the parent gets so frustrated, they end up ripping into the kid. They end up saying all the wrong things. They end up planting all the deadly seeds that years later come out in therapy. What for? What for? If you had a Rebbe, if you had a guide, if you had someone, Bal Chochma, that Ruach Elokim diber bo, and you can turn to him, he can tell you straight away, listen, I work with kids my whole life. I'm telling you, this approach works. This approach doesn't work. You know what type of cinder blocks are taken off of the shoulders of parents when they hear that. At least they know that they have a mahalach. They know they have a direction. But if they don't have a guide and a direction, it turns to frustration. And that's when the real damage is done. life would be better if you had a Rebbe. If people would only know this, they'd be lining up down the block, coming to their rabbi for help, for support, for words of chizuk, for words of guidance. No rabbi's going to tell me what to do. Okay. Then they end up living with fear and doubt and later on disgust because they didn't have a Rebbe to pour their hearts out onto and get guidance. Sometimes the Rebbe will turn them to other people. Sometimes there are certain cases where you do need to step in with therapy and professional help, but let your Rebbe make that call. But at the end of the day, Moshe Rabbeinu showed us, you're my Talmud, you're my son, and I'm your father for the next world. Don't ever forget this. This is powerful. Lech red. Lech red, migdulatecha. Stop enlarging the Resh and the Daled. They got it all mixed up. You know why? You know why the Kabbalat Ol Malchut Shamayim turned into Krumkeit? Because they didn't any longer have their Rebbe. And the moment their Rebbe wasn't there is the moment that the whole house of cards fell. It's not an easy topic to speak on. But it's important. You have no idea how many problems in the future you'll be saved from if you take tonight's advice. And believe me, I'm not pitching my services. Believe me, any good Rebbe, any good rabbi that loves you, go to, unload. You'll be impressed at his reaction. You'll see that, wow, this guy really loves me. I didn't think he actually loved me. I never knew what he thought about me until I actually opened up, and then he opened up. Kemayim panim el panim, right? When you open up, the Rebbe opens up. He says, oh my gosh, this guy really cares for me. That in itself is worth the trip to find out that there's someone out there that cares and is ready to take a bullet for you and go down with you like Moshe Rabbeinu and Klal Yisrael. Rabbi Duvi, these rabbis aren't. No, they are. There are still great rabbis in Klal Yisrael. Go out there and find them and make them yours. That's tonight's message. Because they're great people. I have a story to tell you that I'm embarrassed about. But boy, did I learn a lesson of what a Rebbe is. I learned many years in Yeshivat Itri, in Yerushalayim Ir HaKodesh. How many years? I thought you'd never ask. I learned there as a Bachur for almost 4 years. And then I came back, I met my wonderful wife, and went back to Israel, married in Kolel for another almost 3 years. So it was almost 7 years altogether. At that time, I was very fortunate and lucky to meet great rabbis. I learned by Reb Michal Zilber, a giant Gaon Adir. I learned by Dayan Fisher, Bechavruta, for quite a few years. And I also learned by my Rebbe, Reb Simcha Schiff, who's known as the Ger Dayan in Jerusalem. Now this is interesting. In the yeshiva where I was, and many of the Israeli yeshivot, the first year you hear shir from the Rebbe, first year Bet Midrash, all the way till Pesach. The second year, shiur, all the way till Pesach. Third year Bet Midrash, you hear shiur until Chanukah. After Chanukah, you are with your Havruta the entire Seder, from Chanukah to Pesach, and at that point the Rebbe isn't giving shir anymore, but he goes around the room at the end of the Seder finding out if anyone has questions. So what happens to the Rebbe between Chanukah and Pesach? So generally the Rebbe learns Chavruta with one of the students he got close with. I got lucky. Tell you, Borei Olam, the Rachmanuti showed me, in my lifetime I can write you Megillot with the Dio the ink made out of tears to tell you the amount of times he saved my life. The amount of times he saved Duvi ben Shushan from all types of stuff. From high school to Bet Midrash to years and years later. I'm telling you, Borei Olam is a Rahman. If you want to know what an Abba is, tonight we're talking about a Rebbe, but if you want to know what an Abba is, Avinu Shabbat Shamayim. How many times he saved my skin? And how many times he had mercy on me? So one Zman, the Shiurim ended in Hanukkah. My Rebbe, Reb Simcha Shiv, made up with me. We're going to learn Chavruta together. We're going to learn from Hanukkah Chavruta, every first Seder, all the way till Pesach. To me, it was such an honor that he accepted, that he was willing. Day after day, I would sit there on his bench in front of the Bet Midrash, and I wouldn't give him up. Guys came over to ask questions. I gave him a dirty look. Get out of here! I got him. I'm not ready to share him. Listen, guys, when you're learning with a guy, when you're learning with a Rebbe on the caliber of a world-class Rosh HaYeshiva, one of the great Amkanim of Israel, you get a little selfish. I'll admit it straight away. Forgive me. But I was trying to squeeze out every ounce I had of every minute. And every time a guy came up and gave him an oof, I gave him the eyes. You know the eyes? Gave him the eyes. Till after a while, people stopped coming. They knew. They have to settle the score with me in the dormitory by lunch. At the end of the Seder, we would finish. I'd write down all my notes. I have today maybe 25 notebooks of notes from those years, of Kimat every Masechet that we learned in those 7 years in Israel. What's amazing to me was, one day, it was maybe, I don't know, a few weeks before Pesach, at the end of the Zman, I walk into the Bet Midrash, my Rebbe is already sitting in his spot, it's 9 o'clock, it's time for us to start learning Chavruta. I'm on my way over to learn with him, and a friend of mine runs up to me and says, Duvi, wait, before you sit down with Reb Simcha, wait. He starts asking me a question about the dormitory, beds, rooms, roommates. That stuff can sometimes get sticky. And we're talking back and forth. Yeah, but an American with an Israeli boy in the same room. He does use right guard. We were going back and forth. Finally, we get to the end of the sugya. I didn't realize the time. I was talking to this guy 25 minutes, almost half hour. Oh boy. I said, I'm sorry, I got to run. I leave him. I walk up to my Rebbe, Reb Simcha. I sit down on the bench next to him, and he gives me a look. I'm telling you, I started shaking like a leaf. And he looks at me. And I'm telling you guys, I didn't know what to do with myself. And he says to me in Yiddish, Heint, me lernt nicht. Today, we're not learning. I'm telling you guys, I didn't know what to do. I felt like a wiltering dandelion. I was crying already inside. I didn't know what to, I was like choked up. Rebbe, I'm your son. I love you. Heint me lernt nicht. My face turned white. I got up shaking. I didn't know what to do. I said, Rebbe, this is Heint me lernt nicht. It's okay. Kibalti. Harav tzodek. Bit gerecht. You're right. I'm sorry. Heint me lernt nicht. Okay. I walked away. Broken. I'm telling you, I was broken. I was so broken, I couldn't go to sleep that night. So I got on a bus, and I went out to the center of town where my Rebbe lives, Rehov Pines, right behind the Merkaz Hotel, Malon Merkaz. Reb Simcha Shiv. I come knocking on my Rebbe's door at 11:45 at night. I didn't have enough for round one. I hear the slippers. My Rebbe answers the door. He's in this magnificent blue, like kapota, and he looks like a king. And I could see that he just came from a sefer that was opened on his table. He was learning. I said, Rebbe, please, can I come in for a minute? Rabbi Duvi, come on. I looked at him like, you mean that? Avada, come on. I come in, he kisses me, he hugs me. Zetz chavek. I sit down. We start talking and learning for an hour. At the end, he says, Nu Reb David, what can I do for you? I said, Rebbe, what can you do for me? I burst out crying. I said, Rebbe, I'm begging you, forgive me. I was so wrong today. And he smiles and he says, Daigit nicht, he tells me. Tomorrow we're learning again. Aber gedenkst, he tells me. Remember, ich bin nicht eure Freund. I'm not your friend. I'm your Rebbe, and I love you. I can cry right now thinking about that. He taught me such a lesson. How much he loved me. And I saw on what he did at night that what he did by day was a hatzaga, just to be madrich me, to remind what it means, respect of a Rebbe, respect of Rabbanim, but at the same time, an underpinning and lining of incredible love. We need Rebbes today who love us, who's madrich us. And this is the old generation. Today, it's all about hugs and kisses. It's all about the love. It's all about the warmth. But more than anything, the minute you're connected to your Rebbe is the minute that Resh turns back to the Dalet. It's all about Omachut Shamayim. It's about direction. Dalet is derech. It gives us a mahalach to live by, but to stay with. Says Borei Olam, if you don't have a Rebbe, look what happened the one moment that Klal Yisrael didn't have their Rebbe. Lech red migdulatecha. Why enlarge the Resh and the Dalid? They mixed it up because there was no Rebbe there. For 1 minute on a tiny knach of the difference between the Dalid and the Resh, a Jew can go from Kabbalat Omachut Shamayim to El Acher in no time. Let's find a Rebbe. Thank you for listening, gentlemen.